Welcome to the updated end of 2024 top 15 all-time GOATs in MMA video. We are going to be celebrating greatness and handing out ranking spots to 15 special fighters. And this is all based on resume. This is not based on, the vibe and the aura of the fighters and what they meant to the sport. This is not based on that, guys. This is based on resume, what they've done in the cage, results. And that's basically it. This is an objective ranking, and we've got 15 fighters. All of these guys are GOATs. You may not love the placements, but I tried to be as objective as possible about this, and we'll get into the criteria. But again, keep in mind, if you're top 15 of all time, that's pretty special, right? There's a lot of incredible fighters that aren't even going to make this legendary list. So, if someone's at 13 and you wish they were at the number 2 spot, there are reasons for people being higher than others. It's not just, we're just chucking this guy out here and this guy out here. That's not how it works. Now, let's talk about the criteria to help a lot of you guys understand this ranking system. The most important factor that plays into this is quality of wins, which we are going to be basing the quality of the win based on how good the opponent's resume that you beat was. So, for example, if you have a record of 5-0, a 5-0 record is not always the same. We know that. If you have a record of 5-0 against guys that were 2-5 and 3-4, that will never compare to the record of someone that is 5-0 that beat a bunch of undefeated guys or grizzled vets with great resumes of their own. So quality is really important. How good were the resumes of the people that you were beating? That's the most important factor that we can possibly have. When you beat an opponent, you basically take their resume with you. The second most important thing is going to be quantity. You have to have a decent quantity of wins in order to be numero uno, numero dos. In order to be incredibly high on this list, you got to have some quantity. And if you don't have a lot of quantity, then every single one of those wins has to be insane, or at least you have to have some insane wins. You got to have beaten some GOATs. And we're not in the lazy ranking system. This is not what we do. You guys come to Lucas Tracy MMA GOAT videos for some real objective takes. There is no nostalgia bias. There's no aura bias on this list. Okay, so let's just be happy that people are making the list. And that's another thing that I want to say before we get into this. Every single person on this list is a legend of the sport. They're absolutely goated. But, of course, when you have such a small pool of fighters to choose from, and then you have to nitpick, 15 versus 1, there are going to be some big differences. There have to be differences. There got to be differences. So we got to do this as objectively as possible. But without further ado, let's get into this. Number 15, some people know of him as Stippy. A lot of others like to call him Stipe. And he's from Ohio. Let's introduce Stipe Miocic at the number 15 spot. Stipe is the 15th greatest fighter of all time. Stipe Miocic is the heavyweight GOAT. Yes, he has some losses, but for all of those losses, he's got them back. All right? He beat Francis Ngannou. He beat DC twice, and he beat JDS, so he's avenged that early loss to JDS. He avenged the losses to DC, or the loss to DC. The only loss he never avenged was Stefan Struve, but if you watch the KO, the finish, Stefan Struve landed the nastiest eye poke in UFC history, arguably. There was no chance Stipe Miocic could have defended himself after that, so that was like a really weird one. But wins over Daniel Cormier, multiple of them, even though he's a little bit older. Stipe's a little bit old. Wins over Daniel Cormier, who's also one of the GOATs. A win over Francis Ngannou, who is one of the best fighters at heavyweight in history. And wins over guys like JDS, Verdum. Stipe Miocic has an insane resume. He deserves to be on this list. He's at the number 15 spot. But again, so many great fighters are doing great things these days. This is a young sport. Let's get on to the next one. A very young sport. We can't have guys, floating in the same spot forever. Let's get on to the next one. Anderson Silva, the Spider himself. Anderson Silva is at the 14 spot. The longest win streak in UFC history. Okay? 16 fight win streak. When people are about to pass that, they usually lose. So that in and of itself is really impressive. He's got wins over guys like Vitor Belfort, Dan Henderson. He's got wins over guys like Chris Lieben. All right, now this is the issue with people that are going to say, why is he not higher? Anderson Silva, let's just get this straight. He is one of the GOATs. He is GOATed. He is one of the best fighters of all time. It's like, okay, if I put him higher, who am I going to have lower? That's the thing. So people are never going to be totally happy. I'm just trying to be as objective as possible. The thing, in my opinion, that holds back Anderson Silva a little bit is the lack of strength of resume that his opponents had. Dan Henderson's a great fighter. Vitor Belfort, he's a great fighter. Same thing for Damian Maia. The issue is those fighters in particular do not have goated resumes. And so although Anderson Silva has a tremendous quantity of wins, he never truly beat anyone that was that goated. He never truly beat someone that was just on another level, okay? He did have his fair share of losses. Fair enough, he was an older guy when he was getting those losses, but, 38, that's not that old at, middleweight. For example, look at Jose Aldo. Jose Aldo, 36, 37, he's still able to come to the UFC and get himself a couple of wins. Anderson Silva at 38 at middleweight, the only win he ever got after losing to Chris Weidman multiple times. And again, Chris Weidman, arguably the best resume out of anyone that Anderson Silva, ever fought up until he fought Weidman, that is, and he lost. After the Weidman fight, he only beat Brunson, which was a decent win. But still, he's GOATed. He's one of the GOATs, but there have to be people above him. I'm sorry, I know a lot of people want Anderson Silva at the 3 spot. No, man, he's at the 3 spot. Based on what? Just being biased because of our nostalgia? Just because of the front kick KOs? He had tremendous KOs. There's plenty of people who had great KOs. It's just that I just don't think his quality of wins are that amazing. I think other guys had better quality of wins and harder fights. So let's get on to the next one. Merab Dvalishvili. Merab Dvalishvili is at the number 13 spot. This is probably going to be the most controversial pick on this list. Yes, Merab Dvalishvili, in my opinion, is the bantamweight GOAT. Now, a lot of people are going to be riding. A lot of people are going to say, rage bait, rage bait. No, this is not rage bait. Let me explain this to you. First off, let's talk about this. We have Anderson Silva up there. We got Stipe Miocic up here. All right, we have a bunch of other heavier fighters in this list. What is it about bantamweight that GOAT lists are allergic to? Nobody ever puts bantamweights on their GOAT list unless it's Dominick Cruz. And if you're telling me that Dominick Cruz, his insurmountable resume, is the only guy that can ever be put on a GOAT list as a bantamweight, I just disagree. I think Merab Dvalishvili's resume is better than Dominick Cruz. I think if you really look at his resume, he is the bantamweight GOAT. And in one of the toughest divisions that there is in the UFC, especially in the modern era with all the savages that there are in that division, I think a bantamweight deserves to be on this list. Now you're probably wondering, why is he above Anderson Silva? Well, let's talk about it. Petr Yan. I think Petr Yan has a better resume than anybody that Anderson Silva beat. Petr Yan beat Corey Sandhagen. He beat Aljamain Sterling the first time. I know there was a weird illegal knee situation, but I watched that fight. What was it? 19 minutes? We saw them fight for 19 minutes, and I'm just supposed to ignore that? It's not like Yan popped for steroids. We saw them fight for 19 minutes. Yan was winning that fight. That happened. That is a fight. And if you don't want to count it, we got Corey Sandhagen. We got Jose Aldo, who then went on to beat 3 people after. Yan beat Jose Aldo. He beat Corey Sandhagen. He beat Song Yadong. He arguably beat O'Malley. He, in my opinion, got the dub over Aljamain Sterling. He's got a bunch of other great wins. I think he's got a really underrated resume. And I think that's a better and more impressive win than a Vitor Belfort. I think that's a better and more impressive win than a Dan Henderson. 100%. And if you don't only want to look at that, look at the Sean O'Malley win. Merab just beat this dude. He just beat O'Malley, who beat guys like Marlon Vera and Petr Yan and Aljamain Sterling, who has a really decent resume at this point. Decent. He's also got a win over Jose Aldo, who is a GOAT, who is a top 15 of all-time fighter, who's arguably a top 10 all-time fighter. He beat Petr Yan, who is, in my opinion, one of the most underrated bantamweights ever, who might just be a top 3 bantamweight ever. He beat Henry Cejudo. There's another guy on this list named Demetrius Johnson. His best win is over Henry Cejudo. I know it was a bit of an older Henry Cejudo, but still, that's a good win. He beat Marlon Moraes. He beat Sean O'Malley. And those are like 5 really good wins. And before those wins, he has a high quantity of other wins. I believe Merab is like 12-2 in the UFC versus Anderson Silva. Okay. I think Merab's 5 best wins are arguably better than Anderson Silva's 5 best wins. I think Merab has a better resume. And I know that there's this fuck Merab type of thing, but if you're being objective and you're just looking at the resumes of the opponents that he's beat, I think he arguably has the strongest resume in bantamweight history, and I do not think there is anything truly crazy about putting the strongest bantamweight resume in a top 15 GOAT video. I think it's time you start putting, some of the GOATs at bantamweight in the top 15 best fighters list, because again, especially in the modern era where you got guys like Sean O'Malley, you got guys like Aljamain Sterling and Peter Yan and Jose Aldo since he's moved down to bantamweight. If you're beating these guys, you deserve to be a part of the conversation. I think Merab is a top 15 fighter of all time, and I don't think it's that crazy to say that he passed Anderson Silva. And it's like Anderson Silva was more dominant, but against who, man? He wasn't dominating people like Petr Yan. Merab Dvalishvili 50-45 to Petr Yan. All right, that's more impressive than any win that Anderson Silva has. End of. Demetrius Johnson, okay? Why is Demetrius... You know what? Fuck that, man. Demetrius Johnson, I don't think is ahead of Merab either. I think Demetrius Johnson should go under Merab. I'm being serious. Demetrius Johnson, I actually have him ahead of Merab. Let's change it around. We're actually going to change it around a little bit. I think Demetrius Johnson, his best win is over Henry Cejudo. He lost to Henry Cejudo. That happens to be one of his losses as well. And I know that fight was very close, but still. Outside of Henry Cejudo and Adriano Moraes, who we also lost to, what else are we talking? Bugatinov, Wilson Reyes, Ray Borg. I honestly think that Demetrius Johnson has one of the most overrated resumes of all time. Demetrius Johnson, they were throwing this guy people that just got off of tough. They were throwing this guy people that had 2 fights in the UFC, people that had been cut for the UFC. They were putting at one point, anyone in the cage with them. And the problem with Demetrius Johnson is that he never fought guys like Brandon Moreno. He never fought guys like, Pantoja. Even like Roy Vals. There were not a whole lot of them. Henry Cejudo is the one really solid fighter. I mean, we're talking one of this guy's best wins is Tim Elliott. It's really Henry Cejudo, who he's 1-1 with, who's not even on this list. I don't think Henry Cejudo is a top 15 fighter of all time. That's a good win. But there's really a steep drop-off after that. And again, people have this, and I used to be, I'll throw him in the top 5. But the more I think about it, yes, it's impressive that this guy didn't lose a lot. But, he did lose back in the day. He lost to Dominic Cruz. Fair enough, it wasn't in his division. But this is a GOAT list. It's not a divisional GOAT list. He had a draw with, I forget who, some other guy. Totally forget his name, but he had a draw with him back in the day. Got knocked out in 1FC against Moraes. I just don't think that Demetrius Johnson's resume is top 5. And a lot of people put him in the top 5 because of the title defenses. But I think title defenses may be one of the most overrated things to rate. Yeah, it's impressive to stay on top. I get it. But they were just throwing this guy layup after layup after layup after layup after layup. He is one of the GOATs. Demetrius Johnson is one of the GOATs. I do not think he is top 5. I think every single person that I'm going to discuss from here on out, it'll be very clear that they have better resumes. And again, there's something to be said about not losing a lot, but he did lose. He lost to Cejudo. He got knocked out by Moraes. That is not like a Pantoja level of fighter. That is not like a Brandon Moreno level of fighter. Moraes is very good. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think he'd ever be champion in the UFC, and I don't think he'd ever, be a number 1 contender necessarily in the UFC. So again, DJ is quantity. There was a lot of dominance, 100%, but we can't just favor dominance and say, well, look, he was so dominant, he would have done that to everyone. It's about who did you actually beat, and when it actually comes down to his quality wins, they're very few and far between, and his best quality win, he also lost to the guy. So, yeah, it's just one of those things where I think there's 11 other fighters that have just done a little bit more. You know, for example, let's get on to the next one, Daniel Cormier. Let's talk about this. You know, we're going to talk about Henry Cejudo having a really good resume. We just talked about Stipe Miocic. Stipe Miocic is, in my opinion, the GOAT of heavyweight, and DC knocked this dude out. And not only did he knock out Stipe Miocic, but like we're talking about Rumble Johnson twice. Okay, and Rumble Johnson's one of the most dangerous fighters ever. 100% one of the most dangerous fighters ever. He beat Rumble Johnson twice. You know, he also has a win over Alexander Gustafsson. He's also got a Dan Henderson win, and fair enough, he was about 3 times the size of Dan Henderson, but still, you've got Rumble, you've got Gus, you've got Stipe, you got Volkanovski, and people are going to say, Volkan. Your people's reaction to beating Volkanovski, like, that should be the reaction of all these other wins that these other guys have that you guys want in the top 5. Like, Wilson Reyes, Ray Borg. You know, okay, Volkanovski, I think we could talk about that. That's not a great, amazing win, but Volkan's still doing his thing. Volkan's still around today, doing his thing in the UFC. He's still all right. But again, Stipe Miocic, one of the best fighters ever. Alexander Gustafsson, Dan Henderson. You know, we've got a lot of really good wins on there. Rumble Johnson, as we said. And his only losses are to, you know, John Jones and Stipe. 2 other GOATs. So, you know, I do think that Daniel Cormier, and he's got tons of quantity as well. You know, we've got the Derek Lewis win in there, right? We've got some other wins in there. We've got the guys back in the day in there. You know, Daniel Cormier has tons of quantity. So he's got the quantity. He's got some good quality. Double champion, which is really good. And I know that I just said title defenses are a little bit overrated because it's not necessarily about, you know, did you get a belt this time? It's more about, okay, how good was the guy that you beat? That's why I believe that, for example, a Dan Henderson win is better than a Derek Lewis win on Daniel Cormier's resume, even though the Dan Henderson win wouldn't necessarily give him a belt. So let's get on to the next one. Number 10 of all time is Kamaru Usman. That's right. Kamaru Usman, the closest we've ever seen anyone get to passing up Anderson Silva's win streak, but you know, his quality of wins in that win streak were really, really solid, you know, and I think that people are starting to underrate Kamaru Usman's resume. I really do think people are starting to underrate it, and it all starts with the Colby Covington wins. Now, I know Colby is not so popular these days, and I know he shit the bed in his last performance, and I know Colby's resume is not that great. I get it. But at the time that Kamaru Usman fought Colby Covington, Colby was a tough out if there ever was one. Colby was one of the toughest outs we've ever seen. Colby was good. He was very good. Was he, you know, some monster, top 20, top 25 all-time Dustin Poirier type of resume? Hell no. But I actually do think the Colby Covington wins are good. All right? I do think they're good. He's got 2 Colby wins. He's got 2 Masvidal wins. And you're going to say, Jorge Masvidal. Okay, well, you know, what about most of Silva's wins? Most of Demetrius Johnson's wins? We're going to scoff at Jorge Masvidal. Jorge Masvidal's got a better resume than most people that those guys beat. Okay? That's at least slightly better than the average, you know, person's resume that those guys beat. So, yeah, I actually don't think we should just scoff at Masvidal wins. But if you're going to say, oh, this and that about the Colby wins and this and that about the Masvidal wins, well, we still got the Tyron Woodley win. And Tyron Woodley at the time was on a 5-6 fight win streak. You know, he had just knocked out Robbie Lawler, beat Darren Till, beat Wonderboy, Drew Wonderboy as well, beat Damian Maia. Like, Tyron Woodley was doing really well at the time. He was a champion. Tyron Woodley got dethroned by Kamaru Usman. And we also have a Leon Edwards win in there. Kamaru Usman, that's right, beat Leon Edwards, who is a really solid win as well, back in the day when they fought. All right? Leon and Khamzat Chimaev are the only guys to beat him since. But you know what? Khamzat didn't beat Kamaru Usman. That was a draw. So the only people to beat Kamaru Usman was that guy that choked him out back in the day and Leon Edwards, who beat him twice. But Kamaru's got a win over him. Gilbert Burns as well. Really solid win. You know, that's like prime Gilbert Burns was a beast. So I think that Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington, Burns, Jorge Masvidal, Leon Edwards, Tyron Woodley, RDA. Let's mention RDA as well. He's also got RDA in the mix, and at the time, RDA was still pretty all right. So yeah, I think Kamaru Usman does have himself a decent resume. Damian Maia, Anderson Silva, that's one of his best wins, and I know he fought a better version of Damian Maia, but still, he's got a Damian Maia win. Kamaru Usman, only a couple of losses, really. I don't think he lost to Khamzat Chimaev, so I almost look at that Khamzat fight as something that is actually pretty impressive, because even though he got 10-8'd in the first round, he won the second and he won the third round, and people are going to say, no, he didn't. Yeah, he did. He actually did, because he outlanded Khamzat Chimaev in the second round, and Khamzat Chimaev took him down and kept him there for a minute. That doesn't give him the round necessarily. I'm going to give Kamaru Usman that round, and Kamaru Usman won the third round. Just because Khamzat took him down does not mean he won that round. So we got a draw with Khamzat Chimaev, who is looking to be one of the future GOATs of the sport, maybe. That's very impressive. So I think Kamaru Usman, I think that draw actually helps his resume. So let's get on to the next one. Jose Aldo. All right, now Aldo is a great example of a fighter that, despite having a couple of those losses, he's got a couple pesky losses. He's got a bunch of them in his prime as well, when he lost to Volkanovski in his early 30s, and he lost to Max in his early 30s and Conor in his late 20s. Aldo's got those losses in his prime. But Jose Aldo is one of these guys that, even as he was, getting a little bit older and, still in his early 30s, I know people are going to act like old man Aldo, but he's got some insanely good wins. He's got so many quality wins. We know he had that title reign, which, he got that crazy win streak. Again, I'm not so big on just title defenses, because I honestly think Aldo's best wins are the wins that he got after his title reign, not necessarily during. But let's just talk about Jose Aldo. Of course, he has wins over guys like Frankie Edgar, TKZ, Chad Mendez. But he's also got wins over Renato Moicano. He KO'd Renato Moicano. And look at what Moicano is doing right now, having a resurgence in his career. And it's not like Moicano was some tadpole. Moicano, at the time that he fought Jose Aldo, was still really good. So that win has aged really well. He's also got wins over guys like Jeremy Stevens, Pedro Munoz, Jonathan Martinez, Rob Font, Marlon Vera. Okay, so you've got all these really good wins. Kenny Florian, Ricardo Lamas. Aldo's just one of these guys that just keeps chipping away. And you're looking at his losses. Well, the losses that we're going to count the most, the ones that he had in his prime, Volk, Max, Conor. I mean, aside from Conor, Volk and Max are like top 10 all-time fighters. So those aren't really bad losses to have. But he cannot be ahead of Max and Volk. So, it is what it is. But let's get on to the next one. Jose Aldo, one of the GOATs. But here's another guy who, similar to Aldo, has his losses. But despite having those losses, the quality of this next guy's wins are even better than the quality of Aldo's wins. And he's also got Jose Aldo on there twice. It's Max Holloway at the number 8 spot. Holloway beat Jose Aldo twice, and everyone hypes up Aldo. So you beat the guy twice. That's got to do something for you. But we just talked about the quality of Aldo's resume. Yeah, Max has his losses to Topuria, and he has his losses to Volkanovski. He's got 3 of them. But Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier as well. But Max Holloway also has those similar wins. He's got the TKZ win. He's got the Ricardo Lamas win. He's got the Frankie Edgar win. He's got the Jose Aldo wins. We just talked about Aldo, but he's also got Yair Rodriguez. He's got Arnold Allen. He's got Justin Gaethje. He's got Calvin Kattar, right? He's got all of these really good wins in the modern era as well. He's got Brian Ortega. And if you want to go even further back, we still got other wins. We've got Anthony Pettis, former champion Showtime Pettis. All right, we have Cub Swanson. There are so many amazing Max Holloway wins that this guy has on his resume. And, I think that Holloway, again, one of the greatest resumes ever. He's even got Andre Fili, which is really good. So, yeah, the one thing that holds Max back from being higher than he is, though, is, again, he does have those losses that he's not avenged. He did lose to Dustin Poirier, even though it was close. Maybe he'll beat him next time, and that'll bump him up a lot, because Dustin Poirier is, in my opinion, definitely one of the best fighters to ever do it, even though he's not necessarily going to make this list. But he's got the loss to McGregor back in the day. Fair enough, he was a tadpole, but still. It's not a big deal. But then, you know, we've got the Dustin ones. We got the Volk ones. Fair enough, it's Volk. And fair enough, it's Topuria. But still, you know, hey, 8 all-time, that's pretty good in my book. Let's get on to the next one, Ilia Topuria. I know this is going to piss people off, but it actually makes sense. And this is why. All right, we talked about, listen, I know there's something to be said about quantity. There's something to be said about reigning for a long time, but it's not like Ilia Topuria has just 2 fights in the UFC and that's it. If he just had 2 fights, that wouldn't really help him, but he's got 2 of the best wins of all time. He's got 2 wins over 2 top 10 all-time fighters, which is insane. You know, Max Holloway's resume, in part, is really good because he beat a guy like Jose Aldo and all these quality fighters. Well, what happens when Ilia Topuria beats Max Holloway? He kind of engulfs all that comes with beating Max Holloway in his resume. He kind of, you know, takes his resume and adds it to a part of his collection. And the same thing can be said about Volkanovski. And so not only did he knock out Max Holloway, he's got arguably the best win over Max Holloway, or at least one of them, but he's also got Volkanovski, and I know people are going to say, dude, Volkanovski this, Volkanovski that. That punch that he landed on Volkanovski is knocking out any version of Alexander Volkanovski ever. And the argument against that is, no, man, it doesn't, man. He knocked out Max Holloway, who has the best chin of all time. So, yeah, I don't think it's far-fetched to say that someone that knocked out the guy with the best chin of all time is very capable of knocking out Alexander Volkanovski, no matter how recovered and how refreshed his chin is. All right? And you just watch the way Volk performed in that fight. Volk looked good. Volk looked like Volk when he fought him. And so he beat 2 all-time fighters, but he's also got other wins. He's got 6 other wins. And they may not be the best wins, but it's like, who else is in most people's top 5s? Again, Silva, Demetrius Johnson, right? Well, you know, after you get past their best wins, Cejudo for Demetrius Johnson, and for Silva, what is it, like Vitor Belfort or something like that? Listen, man, after you get past their best wins, and their best wins can't even hold a candle to Ilia Topuria's best wins, they fall off quite a bit, right? I mean, what is Demetrius Johnson's 3rd best win? Probably no better than a Josh Emmett win. It's probably no better than a Bryce Mitchell win. Ilia Topuria's got wins over Bryce Mitchell. He's got wins over Josh Emmett. He's got a win over Yusuf Zalal, and Yusuf Zalal actually is pretty good. That win has been aging well. Yusuf Zalal is a beast. So that's kind of becoming a bit of an equivalent of, you know, Islam Makhachev beating Arman back in the day. It could. But my point is, if you beat 2 top 10 all-time fighters, and they're both basically in their prime, and would I say Volkanovski was in his prime when Ilia beat him? Not necessarily in his prime, but he was not washed. He was not old. It's like, you know, you got to have a bit of an adjustment period. You don't just go from in your prime and all of a sudden you're washed, totally old and totally washed and not competitive in any way in the top 5. Like, that's just not how it works. You slowly drift out of your prime a little bit, okay? Like, Tony Ferguson started to go out of his prime even before he lost that fight to Justin Gaethje, but it was slow. But he beat Volkanovski. He beat Max Holloway. Those guys have such insane resumes. That's got to at least put Ilia Topuria in this conversation. And then, okay, let's add 6 wins to it. That's really good. He's also got no losses, so the ratio is good. I don't think it's crazy to have Ilia Topuria in this 7th spot. Let's get on to the next one. Khabib. We've got Khabib. And I actually think I'm going to switch Khabib down. I think Ilia Topuria is number 6, and I think Khabib is number 7. Khabib Nurmagomedov has an incredible resume. I basically think it's neck and neck with Ilia Topuria because, again, he never lost, which was really impressive. But he also has, again, very good wins. Like, Khabib's best wins are maybe not against all-time top 10 best fighters of all time, but they're against fighters that are at least in the top 50, which is very good. He's got a win over Justin Gaethje, who, in my opinion, has an underrated resume. He's got a win over Conor McGregor, who beat Jose Aldo, who's got a okay, decent resume. Not the best, but he's also got Dustin Poirier, who is one of the best lightweights ever. I think Dustin Poirier is the 3rd best lightweight ever. I actually think Dustin has a better resume than Charles Oliveira, so that is very impressive. But Unfortunately, the reason why I can't have Khabib over Ilia Topuria is that those wins just, they don't compete with Ilia Topuria's Volkanovski and Max Holloway wins. They just don't. And, yeah, you could say, well, Ilia Topuria only has those. Well, he's got Josh Emmett, he's got Yusuf Zalal, he's got Bryce Mitchell, he's got Jai Herbert, he's got a bunch of other ones too. And you could say, well, Khabib has a bunch of other ones. Yeah, Edson Barboza, RDA. But after that, there's really a severe drop-off. Like the Michael Johnson win, I'm sorry. I know Johnson was doing all right at the time. That's not a great win. It's a good win, but it's not a win that really does a whole lot for you. The Edson Barboza win is good, but Bryce Mitchell beat Edson Barboza. Okay? Like Giga Chikadze's beat Edson Barboza. Edson's really good, but people have beat him. Quite a few people have beat him. An RDA, very good, but, you know, still a good win. Still a good win. I think they're neck and neck. Khabib, I'm going to say Khabib's at number 7. He was higher a while ago, but I think 2 people have passed him up. Ilia Topuria has passed him up. But, you know, you really do have to give some credit to Khabib because, again, you know, he does have some quality wins. He does have RDA, Gagey, Barboza, which is pretty decent, Connor, and Poirier. But I think that it's not strong enough to keep him in the top 5. I don't think it's strong enough to keep him in the top 5, even though he's undefeated, which is very good. Khabib doesn't have those losses. That is very good. But, you know, some of these other guys, yeah, they have some losses, but they make up for it with their insane quality wins. But, yeah, Khabib is definitely above guys like Aldo, I still think, because even though Aldo has a really good resume, like, he doesn't have a Max on his resume. He doesn't have a Volk on his resume. He doesn't have, you know, Merab on his resume. Like, who's the best fighter that Aldo's ever beat? He's not necessarily a GOAT, right? Khabib's best win, Poirier. I think that's better than any of Aldo's wins. But let's get on to this number 5, Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira is a number 5 fighter of all time. Listen, man, it was only a matter of time before this guy did it. Now, here's the thing. People are going to be saying, what? Listen, I know Alex Pereira hasn't beaten top 10 all-time fighters, but his wins are really good, man. Alex Pereira's got those really good wins. Let's talk about it. His only loss is to Adesanya. Okay, so he does have a loss, but you know what? He also beat Adesanya as well. And Adesanya is a pretty good fighter. He's arguably top 30 all-time, top 25 all-time. That's pretty good, the fact that he's beaten Adesanya. You know, Adesanya is a top 5 middleweight ever. That is a very, very good win. But he's also got a win over Jan Blachowicz, who is, you know, Jan Blachowicz is a better win than Jamal Hill. It's a better win than Yuri Prochazka. That's a very solid win. And he's got the Sean Strickland win too. Sean Strickland, former champion. Look at all the people that Sean Strickland beat. Sean Strickland has some quality wins, man. So he's got to win over Sean Strickland. He's got to win over Jan Blachowicz. He's got to win over Adesanya. And that's not the end. That is not the end. All right? We're just getting started. He's got to win over Yuri Prochazka. And he got another win over Yuri Prochazka. And he got a win over Jamal Hill. And I know people are going to say, Jamal Hill. Jamal Hill is actually decent. All right? He beat Glover Teixeira. He beat the dog shit out of Thiago Santos. You know, he got to the belt. Like, he was a guy that was going crazy through the rankings. Like, fair enough, Alex Pereira makes these guys look silly. Fair enough, but before they fight Alex Pereira, they all look scary. They all look terrifying. You got to admit it. Not when you're watching the tape, comparing the tape to Alex necessarily, but, you know, it's like, I think it's very easy to say that Jamal Hill wasn't ever good after Pereira makes him look easy, right? But then you got Khalil Roundtree, who may not be the best win, but that's, you know, it's an okay title win. It's just one of those that, you know, Demetrius Johnson's got a Khalil Roundtree win in there. You know, Anderson Silva's got one of those Khalil Roundtrees hanging around. And he happens to have a Khalil Roundtree win too, which is pretty decent. It's okay. It's not great. But, you know, Yuri Prochazka twice. And people are going to say, Yuri ain't shit. But Yuri beat Glover Teixeira, who has a good resume. Yuri Prochazka, Dominic Reyes. You know, we've got other wins that Yuri's got too. Rakic finished him. Like, nobody else has beaten Yuri Prochazka in the UFC. No one else. He does have a decent resume. Adesanya, Strickland, Blachowicz, 1 loss, 9 wins. He's very close to Khabib. He's close to Ilia Topuria. Like, all these guys are very close. All these guys are very close. But what I really like about Alex Pereira's resume is that there are very few losses. He's dominant as well, which is also pretty good. But He's got a bunch of wins. Like that 9-1 ratio, that's a really good ratio. That is a very good ratio. And like 7 of them are high-quality wins. So let's get on to the next one. Alexander Volkanovski. That's right. Volkanovski, yeah, he lost to Islam Makhachev when it was statistically permissible to lose when he got head kicked. It's like, dude, Volkanovski was fat and out of shape. All right, whatever. Let's get to the real losses. Ilia Topuria. Yeah, Ilia Topuria knocked him out. Does that mean Ilia all of a sudden jumps over him? Not necessarily. I don't think Volk jumped over Max with just one win over Max. Right? I don't think Max jumped over Aldo just by beating Aldo one time. But I do think that if Volk loses to Ilia again, they'll flip. I think that Ilia needs like one more win to maybe pass up Volkanovski, or if he beats Volk again, they can flip. But Volkanovski, 3 wins over Max Holloway, and people are going to be saying, well, Ilia Topuria beat Holloway better. It's like, he beat him in his way. He beat him in his way. He knocked him out. That's how Ilia Topuria beats people. But beating Max Holloway by decision and giving Max 3 chances to try to right that wrong, and Max Holloway is arguably one of the best decision type of fighters ever, that's actually pretty impressive. Not many people beat Max by decision, let alone clean decisions. And Volkanovski had 2 clean decisions against Max Holloway. The trilogy schooled him. The first fight shut him down. The second fight lost the first 2 rounds, had one of the most clutch performances in UFC history, making a comeback against Max Holloway when it was melatonin gate and he got woken up in the middle of the night. Okay? So yeah, those 3 wins against Holloway, decisions, clean, 2 of them. The other one being one of the most clutch performances in UFC history. Those are pretty good. Okay? Those are pretty good. And he's got Jose Aldo in Aldo's prime. So we've got prime Jose Aldo. We talked about Merab beating Aldo, right? That's pretty good. But not as good as Volkanovski beating Aldo 5 years earlier, basically. It's not the same. And I know people are going to be saying, well, Aldo that. Listen, Volkanovski was a tadpole, man. And he beat Chad Mendes. We're going to talk about Aldo Chad Mendes. Conor Chad Mendes. He beat Chad Mendes in Mendes' early 30s. He beat Aldo in Aldo's early 30s. Aldo was on a 2-fight win streak. He beat Max Holloway 3 times. He's got a win over Yair. People don't like to remember, but he's got a win over Yair. So there's that. People tend to forget. He's got a win. I think he's got one over Ortega. I think he's got an Ortega one too. So that's all right. He's got the Ortega one as well. And I believe he's got a Darren Elkins one. Volkanovski, it's like, oh, wait a second. Whoa. He's got TKZ. So it's just like, what are we even doing here, man? We really got to prove this point. Volkanovski, it's like, as soon as you start saying, who did he only beat Max? As soon as you start saying he only did this, he only did that, you can always be, well, what about this guy? What about this guy? It's like at every step you get proven wrong. So yes, Volkanovski is still an all-time GOAT. If Volkanovski is not in your top 5, I don't know what the fuck you're doing. Okay? Like, yes, I know Ilia Topuria knocked him out. I get it. Volkanovski's not going to be here forever. Like, Anderson Silva fans, people that were like diehard fans of Anderson Silva, let's say he's your favorite fighter, he's not going to be there forever. He's not going to be number 3, number 2, number 1 forever. At some point he wasn't going to be there forever. Volkanovski's not going to be there forever. Like, time is ticking. And this guy wants to fight Ilia again. Volkanovski can save himself by fighting a Movsar Evloev, fighting an Aljo. Right now he's at the number 4 spot, but he was at the number 3 spot in my last video. So he actually has slipped down a little bit. Number 3, Islam Makhachev is the 3rd best fighter of all time. He beat Volkanovski twice. 1.5 times. Second time Volkanovski was fat, out of shape, in his head. But he beat Volkanovski in Volk's prime. We talk about Ilia Topuria beating Volk. Volk looked like Volk. Volk looked really good. Was he in his prime? He was 35. The best version of Volkanovski ever, arguably, was the one coming off of the Max Holloway trilogy, where he was moving up, and he not only had 1 training camp, he had 2 training camps for Islam Makhachev. People don't think about this, but he was the backup fighter for Makhachev and Oliveira. He had like 3 months to prepare for that. He was bulking up going into that. And then when that fight took place, he had another 4 months to prepare for his real fight with Makhachev. So he had a long 7-month bulk, right? He had never been KO'd. This is when Volk still had a granite chin and all that. Yeah, Islam Makhachev beat true prime Alexander Volkanovski. the first person to ever beat Alexander Volkanovski. And, you know, fair enough, the second win over Volk isn't that good, but you're beating Volkanovski, who is a top 5 all-time fighter. That's going to do something for your resume. But how else is Islam Makhachev here? Well, he's also got Dustin Poirier, and he's also got Charles Oliveira. So he's also beaten 2 other top 5 all-time fighters in his own division. Dustin Poirier, I believe that guy's top 20, top 25 all-time, arguably. Charles Oliveira, probably top 30 all-time fighters. So he's got those wins. He's got Arman Tsarukyan as well. That is an amazing win. You know, the Dan Hooker win. A few years ago, it didn't look so good, but now Dan Hooker's on a 3-fight win streak. It's actually aging well. Dan Hooker just beat Mateusz Gamrot. And he's got other decent wins as well. He's got the Bobby Green win, And even though he's lost way back in the day, it's one of those like Max Holloway losses to Conor McGregor. He was a tadpole back then, got knocked out. Since then, he's gone on a 14-fight win streak, which is really impressive. And he just doesn't have a lot of losses, right? That ratio is just insane. I mean, we talk about Khabib 13-0. That ratio is perfect. Alex Pereira 9-1, but Islam Makhachev is 14-1. Let's get on to the next one. George St. Pierre is the second best fighter of all time. I think that George St. Pierre, some of his wins are overrated, like the Bisping win and whatnot, but you look at the guys that GSP was beating, for example, in his title reign, and yeah, fair enough, he wasn't beating any guys that were necessarily goated outside of like the Matt Hugheses, right, and the BJ Penns, which those are phenomenal wins. He beat BJ Penn, he beat Matt Hughes, but a lot of the guys that he was beating were on some really crazy win streaks, right, like Jake Shields, Carlos Condit. I mean, a lot of these guys were on some really sick win streaks, Nick Diaz. So I do think that GSP has a really good combination of tons of quantity with decent quality. Like, I would say those types of wins that GSP had, in the quantity of those wins, most of them were the equivalent of like a Brian Ortega, like a Yair Rodriguez, those types of wins. And those are pretty good if you've got a ton of them and you've only got a couple of losses in your entire career, right? So, yeah, GSP, second best fighter ever. I think that if Islam Makhachev beats one more guy, I think if he beats a prime Arman Tsarukyan or he beats a Ilia Topuria, he soars above GSP. But yeah, I still think that GSP is holding his own at the second spot just because of how many quantity wins he has, and they're also decent quality. A lot of them are really good quality. We also have Jon Jones at the number 1 spot. Jonathan Jones is just an absolute marauder, but really, Daniel Cormier. You've also got Anthony Smith, but listen, we just got a lot of quantity. Jon Jones is similar to GSP. He's got like a ton of quantity, but just slightly better quality. Cyril Gane, in my opinion, that's actually a very good win. Thiago Santos, that's pretty good. Alexander Gustafsson twice, very good. Daniel Cormier, we're only going to count one of those, but still he beat DC by decision, which was very impressive the first time. And, of course, you've got the other wins. You've got the Rashad Evans, man. You've got the freaking Ryan Bader wins. You've got the Shogun Rua wins. You've got the Glover Teixeira wins. That win is aged really, really well. I mean, we talked about Alex Pereira. Alex Pereira beat Yuri Prohaska and Jamal Hill, who their best wins are against Glover. Well, Jon Jones beat a good version of Glover Teixeira, right? Very good version of Glover Teixeira. If he beats Stipe Miocic, it's going to be even harder for people to pass him up. But I know Stipe's a little bit older, but Stipe's underrated, and I'm going to make a video on this soon. He's got an underrated chance too. But either way, Jon Jones, quantity, lack of a lot of losses, right? We talk about Islam Makhachev, how it's impressive for him to only have 1 loss and 14 wins. Well, Jon Jones has 16, 17 wins and 1 loss to Reyes, and that's basically it. So, yeah, I don't think that Jon Jones and GSP are unpassable, though. Like, I do think people can pass them up. Islam Makhachev's got a lot of fights left in him. I think if he wins 3 more, he's definitely the go to the entire sport. Ilia Topuria, if Ilia Topuria beats an Islam Makhachev and beats 2 other people, I think he could be the go to the sport. I think if Alex Pereira beats Magomed Ankalaev and moves up to heavyweight and wins there, I think he could be the go to the sport. But right now, Jon Jones, I still think his resume just edges out George St. Pierre just a little bit. And I think the GSP, he's still up there. But let me know what you guys think. Until next time.